Welcome, everybody. My name is Steve Bachman. I'm president of the Atlanta Innovation Forum. I'm excited about tonight's session, and I'm excited you've all joined us. We have a wonderful panel put together by our programs committee talking about this interesting, challenging, and crazy world of privacy and security. And I know it's something that's dear to everybody's heart. We wouldn't be here without great support from you and great support from a lot of other people, especially our sponsors. And I just want to take a moment to thank RightPoint, Stone Resource Group, Carabiner Communications, Stable Kernel, and our Women's Driving Innovation sponsor, Cox Communications. We have a great panel tonight. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring onto the stage Carlos Bach. He's head of technology of a long-time forum sponsor, the GSMA, also a board member of ours and was the leader in putting this panel together with David Eisenson and Scott Graves. And I want to thank all of them. And I want to turn it over to Carlos, give him a chance to introduce himself, give some flavor on the session tonight, and more importantly, introduce our rockstar panel for the evening. And I'll catch up with you, Carlos, at the end of the session, tell you all thank you very much for a great job and go from there. So without further ado, Carlos and our session tonight.
Thank you, Steve. Good day, everyone. My name is Carlos Bosch, and privacy and security and data management are part of any technology. Organizations, regardless of their size, need to have policies around security, and they need to have privacy procedures. To discuss this subject, like Steve mentioned, we assembled this great panel that brings great expertise in information security policy and identity. Please help me welcome these experts that will be discussing this subject. We will have Julia Meredith, which is a supervisor at the Cybersecurity Initiative and Resource Fusion Unit at the FBI, Matt Littleton, Global Advanced Compliance Specialist at Microsoft, Donna Gallagher, President and CEO of New Orleans Enterprises, Michael Becker, Founder and CEO of Identity Practice, and a great expert and college professor. And last but not least, Chad Hunt, which is a special agent of the FBI here in Atlanta, where he leads the cyber division, which imposes risk and consequence on adversaries. Welcome, everybody. What I would like to do today is, I want to have takeaways. I want to ensure that when we leave today, the audience and me, because we are all students on cyber and identity, and we are also students on privacy, how can we start a program? I would like everybody to see how can we use law enforcement, that law enforcement can be your friend for this. Hopefully my friend Matt will help us remove some ambiguity on how can we implement this and where can we find resources. These are some things that are very important. Now, let's start with the poll, Liz, if you don't mind helping me. Since the pandemic, do you feel more or less at risk with your personal and corporate security and privacy? While we do this poll, I would like to start a conversation with the FBI. Since the pandemic, we have seen an explosion of the number of business email compromise complaints. Julia, what are they? And this is a new trend, or this is something that it was already there?
Well, thank you, Carlos. BEC, business email compromise, pretty much first arrived on the scene in 2013, and it has been a steadily growing crime problem for the FBI, other federal law enforcement since that time. But in 2020, excuse me, what we have seen is the number, we've had over 600,000 complaints on our ic3.gov site that collects cybercrime complaints, which is more than the 2 prior years combined. So what has happened is, in addition to BEC, there's also all types of crime have really exploded as well. And I think a lot of that is due to the tremendously increased numbers of people working from home on unfamiliar platforms, perhaps all kind of different platforms, varying levels of security and patches on their systems.
Thank you, thank you. I don't know if we can see the results of the poll yet.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I'd say that's pretty.
Yes, everybody is looking at the same thing. Now, let's start with the conversation. Now that we see that we're all at risk, Donna, can you help us? What is the process for setting up this information security program? You know, how do we start?
Sure, Carlos. Well, it's actually the same process for a security program and a privacy program. And that's number one, you start with a risk assessment. What I mean by that is you need to go to each one of your executives and you ask them, what assets do you have that you deal with, that are high value to the organization? So that might be data, it might be blueprints, it might be hardware, it might be product that you maintain in your inventory. And then what are the processes that relate to those assets, and who are you sharing, who has access to those assets? Because those are going to be your threats. People who have access to the assets are the ones that are going to compromise them. And I hear a lot of, if you've come up through IT or security, you're kind of familiar with an asset inventory, but maybe not so much the process inventory. So that is a point that I wanted to make out of. You really do need to have a good list of your processes. So is it my HR and recruiting? Is it my my payroll process or my accounts payable process that I feel there's a lot of risk involved with? And you really, you take that inventory and then you look at really what controls you have in place that surround those assets, and then you can start doing priorities from there. But you do need to do across the whole business, so it's not just an IT thing. You want to look at the processes in terms of, is there a segregation of duties? Is there redundancy? Is there a single point of failure for anything? Are you relying on a particular vendor for one aspect that's going to take your whole organization down if that service isn't available? So risk assessment really is the heart and soul of both your security and your privacy program. Thank
you. Now, you talked a lot about process, and for me, process are policies. I would like to revert the conversation to a policy expert, Matt. Is an enterprise ever ready? How do you decide an appropriate policy, and what advice can you give us to be able to start this? Because when you're doing policy and you are encompassing everything that Donna mentioned, you're talking from HR all the way to hardware. How can we do this?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I think Julia laid out a couple of topics there, as did Donna, that I want to build on. And I am definitely the guy that's all about driving out ambiguity as we go forward here. As in some of our prep calls, really talked about this a lot. So I'll offer a couple of things. First, if you use, as you go forward, after you've kind of done that risk assessment, understand your environment, using either a national or an international standard to align your controls. Things like NIST 853 here in the US, there's ISO 27001 for international standards. You don't actually have to bite off and eat the entire elephant at once. I mean, so when somebody picks up one of those standards, I don't know if anybody's actually gone out and like read through NIST 853. It's quite a substantial, piece of work. Nobody there. Has. Oh yeah, I'm all in on it. The real important piece on that, though, is you then get to a common language. So if you are mapping your actions that you're responsible for into that framework, pick one that works for you. You then have the ability to have a really rich discussion, not only internally, but then externally with auditors and regulators, and then actually downstream with your customer base. You can explain to them, these are the things that I'm doing, and I've aligned it against this industry standard. So that's the first one, is don't be afraid of those and actually use it. And then the second thing I offer, from that perspective, is really leverage the power of your cloud provider. As people are shifting in, and this is where Julie's talking about new platforms and things that people don't understand, and this is where the ambiguity really, really gets you. Those standards that we use, I mean, certainly I'll take the Microsoft perspective on this now, but you can replicate this with sort of any of your providers. We seek to be explicit with all of our customers that use our platforms. If there's 200 controls that are involved, Microsoft's going to do 150 of them. These are the 150 that we're doing. This is exactly how we're doing it. This is how we're giving you the audit data and the audit plan, so you have confidence that we're doing what we're doing. But I think more important than that is actually clearly saying these are the 50 of those 200 that you have to do. Because I mean, the platform can be secure, but if you aren't doing these 50 things, you are at risk. So really important to have that delineation with whoever your provider is to make sure you know they're doing this and here's how I know. And then also here's where I'm responsible and what do I actually have to do. And we seek to make that transparent for folks and actually have it included inside the platform itself so you know what's going on.
Where to start? What would be your advice for a startup, for a small company that need to do something, they're starting a new service, but they're saying, wow, how do I do this?
So from our perspective, I mean, if you're going to adopt a platform, we actually have things that are built into the platform. I mean, there's capabilities, things like called Secure Score, where we've actually gone in and said, hey, if we will stack rank against these international standards, these are the most impactful things that you can do. So we recognize, I mean, there's 24 hours in the day, you've only got a certain number of people. You need to kind of have that risk profile in your head, like what Donna talked about, but inside the platform, we'll give you if you've got 20 minutes to go do something, do this first, here's how you do it, and here's the return on actually doing that, so that you actually spend your time hitting the most impactful controls right up front. I mean, and that's the real message in all of this, is each one of your providers should give you sort of a crawl, walk, run program, all the rest of that. We've tried to build it into the platform. But when you spend your precious resources up front on the most impactful actions that you can take, and I think as we go through the night tonight, we'll talk about some of what those actually are.
Fantastic. Now, let me switch to Michael. Michael, you're a strategist, you're an entrepreneur, you and I talk a lot about identity and privacy. Now, when we try to adopt the security policies, they clash with utilization, adoption, privacy. How can we rationalize this? What kind of advice can you give us there?
Yeah, they clash only in the extent that we don't understand them necessarily. And so to give a framework, I'd like to have us all think about this way. They all go hand in hand. So what Donna had said is really quite astute in that it's, understand and mitigate your risk. So, and then how you go about doing that is through a privacy assessment, which her firm is an expert at helping companies do. And then Matt says, like, once you have that assessment, start making sure that you put in the appropriate systems and the appropriate policies and ensure those are happening along the standards, because that will allow for consistency in deployment. And those are all really great, both strategic and tactical ways to approach this. Another way to think about it, though, is, and I'd like to have us all consider this. If you take a big step back and look at it from a strategic perspective, there's kind of three cornerstones, or what I call the pillars to identity protection and management. The one pillar is what we've been talking about thus far, and I'll put that into the bucket of security. And essentially that is, how do we secure our systems? How do we protect our systems? And how do we ensure that only those that are authorized can have access to whatever stack and layer to our system that we want to have? So let's call that over here, we'll call that pillar number one. Pillar number two is this idea called privacy. And again, we often mix up the terminology quite a bit. Earlier, I think Matt just talked about, getting the words right really matters in this context. The idea of privacy actually was originally defined by a guy, the most common term of privacy was defined by Alan Weston in 1964. And it has evolved slightly, but not much since that time. And privacy is really defined as the having control of the who, what, when, where, for how long, and for what purpose my identity and personal information is used. And for the longest of time, individuals, the people, the data subjects of that information have not been part of that conversation. We have allowed enterprise, and we've essentially evolved to allow our industry to make those decisions for us. And frankly, it's led to a lot of great things, but it's led to a lot of unexpected consequences and externalities. All of the social dilemma video that Netflix just put out, and so you have that position there. So those are the two cornerstone pillars. We'll call that privacy, the ability for an individual and/or in this context a company, because it's not just about me, Michael Becker, the person. This is also about Microsoft, the company, or small, medium-sized business, the company, as a single entity, to choose for themselves the who, what, when, where, for how long, and for what purpose information about them, their own IP systems can be used. And then the third pillar is I bundle it into what I call compliance. And that compliance pillar, it really falls around both governmental and jurisdictional regulation, as well as industry best practice, because industries self-regulate as well. And so worldwide, we're seeing quite a bit happening on this compliance front, a la GDPR, Global Data Protection Regulation, the CCPA, the Consumer Privacy Protection Regulation. And in fact, Gartner just came out with a study about 4 or 5 months ago that said by 2023, 60% of the world's population is going to be under the jurisdiction of one of these privacy regulations that says people have a right and ownership and control of their data. Right? So what is that going to mean to your business? What's that going to mean for your business? What is that going to mean to your business? Not to mention that for more and more businesses, our industries are starting to get on this bandwagon as well. And there's really at this compliance level 3 kind of intellectual mindsets that come to the concept of compliance. And one is the US model, a secular model of open data. The next one I'll call is the European model, and I'll refer to that as a self-sovereign model, that the data subject has a human right to their data. And the third model is what we'll call the social engineering model. That as a society, and this is more of say China and other type of societies that use this data to help engineer and facilitate the way they want their society to run. And this is, I don't want to cast any moral judgment, because we can very quickly say this is right and that is wrong. Well, the reality is we do all 3 in every single country. It just depends on how do we apply those ideological models in society. So for example, in the US, we're primarily open data. But in California and in about 11 other districts, we have the self-sovereign models actually coming online as we speak, California being one of the first. And we have a social engineering model. We call it the credit score. And we've been living with that for a while to determine how we engineer and manipulate and guide society to work in a particular way. So the way I would answer your question is we need to think about privacy, security, and compliance, balance that through the lens of risk assessment, balance that through the lens of systemization, and then later in the conversation, hopefully we can get to actually how do we empower the individual to actually participate in this overall approach.
Before I jump, no, thank you. That's an excellent answer. And before I jump back to law enforcement to look what are the trends, Matt, this is of the, a question that I'm dying to ask you. Where do you see policies for Washington on the spot? Yes. Where do you see Washington here on policy? Because everything is coming out of California, Europe. Some work is being done between GSMA and NIST and right. Microsoft. Where do you see this coming from Washington in policies?
So, I mean, if the question is, do I think that Washington is going to lead, and are we going to get to a federal policy in the short order?
Yes. Do you think that we will have a federal policy, or do you think
happen? I'm not necessarily confident that that's actually going to occur in the short order. But certainly, I mean, from the perspective of Microsoft and how we've responded to that, I mean, I've spent an enormous amount of time talking to customers about GDPR and CCPA and all, and we've taken the approach, and I think it's important for everybody that's listening to all of this, is that you've got to make these decisions as well. For your business, if you're going to build something, how are you going to do that? I mean, are you going to try and split out? Okay, I'm going to make sure that these people that are in Europe are going to be GDPR. Microsoft has essentially taken those things as the new low watermark. We said, look, it's almost impossible to operate, a global platform efficiently and try and carve that up. Like we'll just accord those rights to everybody. So I think that what's happening here is almost by default, you've got major players. I mean, Europe has come in with their policy. Now, California is certainly a heavyweight here in the United States. They start to shape the debate. And what's going to happen, and what is happening, is that all of the providers are actually starting to respond to those regulations to be adherent to that. And that becomes kind of this de facto standard. I mean, it would be brilliant for us to remove ambiguity. The guy that's talking about removing ambiguity, it's just super hard, 50 states and jurisdictions, and everybody's different. This is just really complicated.
It's very complicated.
But again, by the way, Matt, just to interrupt you on that real quick. Yeah, to interrupt, what I like what you're doing there too is you're starting to see it not just as that legal checkbox that we need to check off, but as a system performance issue, as well as a market differentiator, right? You can actually use that now as a tool to separate yourself from the masses.
No, you both got great points. I want to switch a little bit the conversation and talk to Chad, if it's possible, because Chad, we have the tools, we have the policies, we have the systems, but we still see many attacks. And if we, when I talked to you, we were talking about ransomware. And what are the practices, what attacks are you seeing? What are the best practices and any recommendations that you can give us on preventing them?
Sure. Yeah, unfortunately, they are happening a lot. And, Julie and I unfortunately come in when some of these controls and regulations and compliance things fail. So they're important to have, but unfortunately, the bad guys still get through. But yeah, ransomware, especially over the last few months, has really gone on the rise. I've seen it from both low-level ransomware, where people are just looking for a few $1,000s because they want to get a new car, or they want to fund a trip to college, up to millions of dollars. There are now clients paying tens of millions of dollars for ransomware. I would be remiss if I didn't say the FBI's policy is not to pay the ransomware, but we recognize that it's a more nuanced decision. So one thing for the people that are listening to consider is have a policy, have a plan for if you are hit by ransomware on whether or not to pay, because in the heat of the moment is not when to make that decision. Trend-wise, I'm assuming a lot of the people on this call are up on what's happening in the news for cybersecurity. Exfiltration of data is the new name of the game, where groups go into a company, exfiltrate the data, and then also hold that for ransom. So they're upping the ante. So not only do they encrypt your data, but they also exfiltrate it and then hold it for ransom. It's good to note that while they're in your system looking for your data, they also do a lot of reconnaissance to get a sense of your company and know how much you can pay. I'm aware of negotiations where the ransom actors have come back and said, no, we did our research. You can actually pay this much because here's your insurance policy. So that's an interesting commentary on what information is available on your networks that you might not think is important. So keep an eye on what, if you can get at it, the bad guys can get at it.
How can companies use you or Julie as a resource? Because sometimes when it's happening, companies don't know that the FBI is there to help. How can we reach to you?
Well, you can call us.
Yeah.
Yeah, but have a relationship ahead of time with your local FBI office. I come out all the time, do these kind of presentations. So does Julia, participate in tabletop exercises. But develop a relationship. We can share some best practices up front, and then hopefully provide some fundamentals that I think everybody here would also provide on how to not be tricked into clicking on something or downloading something. Email is still one of the principal ways that guys are into systems, as our remote desktop protocol, RDP. So in terms of best practices and phishing testing, closing off RDP, and then backups. I'd love to tell you that there's something more sophisticated, but having backups that are offline and that you've practiced restoring, hugely important.
Thank you. Now, Donna, you are a virtual chief information security and privacy officer, correct? And you advise medium and small companies. What is preventing companies from adopting all these tools and policies that we have been discussing? Because you see the action, you see what companies are thinking.
Well, yeah, I also do help some larger companies too if they just need an aspect of their security program. They don't have, let's say, another resource. But there's never enough money to do everything that you want to do security-wise. So that's kind of why we get back to that risk assessment, is really just putting those resources around the biggest threats to your environment. And the other mistake that I often see is they'll say, well, let's just follow all the best practices. And maybe they're implemented and maybe they're not. So if you get into a situation where your policy says one thing and you're not actually doing that, and then there turns out to be a breach, then there could be an exposure. So a lot of companies do kind of make their mistake of just saying, let's just take a boilerplate policy, put it in, and that's what we're going to go with. And that's not always the best thing. You really do have to, like I said, understand what your risks are.
Thank you. Now, let me ask a question to Julia here, because having this conversation on I'm not talking lockdown, COVID will be crazy, because everybody's changing how we're working. And this is a question that I have back to Donna and Matt, because we have changed how we work. We have changed how, it's more difficult to safeguard your network when everybody is spread out. And like me, I'm not even working from Atlanta. I'm in Florida, trying to get everybody sick. Just kidding. Julia, what threats of remote that remote working is bringing? What threats are you observing that are horrible here?
Well, one of the aspects that we're seeing is that, people working from home, it's, we've all heard about the Zoom bombing. So that, kind of, I think was probably a little overrated in hazard, but it was more nuisance. But it definitely, when you have people working from home, participating in meetings, they're not necessarily cognizant of what's in their background. And that's actually pretty fertile ground for gathering information as to social engineering. I was watching a newscaster the other day that, it was pretty clear from what was behind him that he was a huge Star Wars fan, from the, the Princess Leia, Han Solo bookends to the lightsaber on the wall. So, people don't necessarily think about that. And, along those lines, just to kind of second what Chad said about with ransomware, that they know what your limits are. That's what happens, that once they're in your system, say they're able to compromise your device at home, they can then move into your company network as well and get a whole range of information. And, for BEC, they'll wait. They're not necessarily going to do a quick one and done. They're going to wait and see, okay, what contracts are coming down the line to get paid, and what's the name of the contractor. So then they'll actually go ahead and set up spoof domains to imitate those contractors. So it's a matter of, people are at home, they're more exposed to, social engineering attempts. They get that call at the other end of the line, and it's like, hey, we need this paid right now. And that's a new process. They can't just get up and go down the hall to, the CFO and say, hey, did you really want me to pay that in gift cards? So we're seeing a whole range of different attacks that have really just really exploded with people working from home.
Thank you. Now, there's this question is going to go back and forth between Michael and Matt. When let's talk about when we go remote and when we implement new service. Let's talk about authentication, privacy, and identity first. Michael, what do you think is missing when what is happening today? And you know that I am a proponent on sovereign identity, but from your standpoint, what is missing in this conversation in that aspect?
Yeah. So a lot's missing, but I think you answered the question. I mean, it's self-sovereign identity, but not necessarily from a technical perspective per se, because that's unfortunately, self-sovereign identity is wrapped up in the execution mindset more than it is actual practical thought, because there's a lot of ways to implement that. I think what's missing is the human, is the person, the individual data subject. The vast majority of even our conversation today has been about systems, standards, regulations. How do you respond to harm? It really fundamentally boils down to, And Chad already mentioned this a little bit. Education is definitely something that we need to do. But if I were to bubble up this conversation, I would say what's missing is this understanding of this fundamental issue, is that we are connected, we are concerned, and yet we all desire more control and convenience, right? And along those lines, we are all conflicted with what's called the privacy paradox, where we have a desire for privacy and security, but because of our human nature and our ethnobiology and a whole bunch of other reasons that we can get into, we will forego our privacy and security for short-term value and convenience. And I think a lot of that is because the short-term convenience is immediate, whereas the risk is asynchronously long-term, right? So I'll get the convenience today, but the risk happens 3 to 5 years from now. And we disconnect those two things. The harm happens that farther away. And this is just going to get worse. I mean, if you look at the statistics, by 2025, it's estimated that the average individual will interact with an IoT device 4,800 times a day, or nearly every 13 seconds of their day, right? And so connection, concern, control, and convenience, I think, is something we need to consider. We need to understand and tease apart the concepts of identity and personal information. Identity is about resolving to a thing or to me. You know, what is the identity of that thing? And if you're in the identity wonk camp, it's all about that resolution of identity. Then you have another camp, which is the personal information camp, and this is all about my information, my explicit data, my demographic data, my explicit data, my contextual data, my intimate data. And then most importantly, another category which we often disregard, my derived data. That data that is derived about me and labels me within society in such a way that those labels then now are used for, say, social engineering and open data self-sovereignty models. So what we need to realize is understand those distinctions they're both different and the same. You know, and depending on how you're talking about them, from a systemization perspective, it tends to be identity. From a privacy perspective and control and ownership, it's a personal information conversation. We got to get better at managing that. But ultimately it comes down to the people. And I like what Julia just mentioned about, you know, people's understanding of the uses and their tools and the systems and what's behind them. I mean, one thing, you know, companies could do, since we're really in a B2B concept, is realize that the average household today has individual, not just the household, has at least 10 connected devices associated with every individual. By 2022, the average household will have at least 50. My household already has at least 75 to 100. So the issue is, what are you doing as a business to help your employees understand those devices and secure those devices? Are you helping them lock down the user credentials for those devices? Are you giving them password managers? Are you giving them email aliasing tools and capabilities? Are you giving them target tracker managers, so they, you know, to help block their surveillance of their behaviors? So to fundamental this down, then I think there are 5 pillars when it comes down to identity protection that's both appropriate to consider for business and the individual. It first and foremost starts with an intent and awareness. You need to be aware of the situation and have an intention to protect yourself. The second pillar is behavior. You need to actually start adjusting your behaviors. Don't click on the fishy email if it seems fishy, because it probably is. You then need to have appropriate policies and protections in place. Namely, you need to identity insurance, identity restoration services, cybersecurity for your insurance of your business. You then need to actually enact your rights. You know, use them or lose them, as they say. Enact your GDPR rights, enact your CCPA rights. And on the flip side of that, encourage your customers to do so and get excited about giving them their rights, and get it away out of the business of being a legal checkbox. Oh, thank God that's done. Let's not deal with that anymore. To revel in this opportunity to have a new relationship with your customer and to be actively in a bi-directional exchange of that first party data, because that will differentiate you significantly in the market. And then finally, both at a business level and at a individual level, adopt the active and passive technologies, like a password manager being active, passive technology being like appropriate VPN and antivirus software, into your life, on your desktops, through all of your employees, so that they can be as empoweredly protected as they can. Because right now there's about 6 cohorts in the industry. There's still about 24% of us that are widely and blissfully unaware. And then you have the apathetic and indifferent. They care, but there's nothing they can do about it. Then you have the impaired. They're trying to do what they can, but they don't know. They don't trust anybody. It's not happening. You have the very small few that are in fact empowered, but they're only empowered in mind. They're not empowered with the tools because we're not providing people the right tools. And then you have my aspirational one, the digital Buddha, and that's the digitally enlightened. And hopefully it won't take us another 2,500 years to get one of those. But that's my thought on that.
No, thank you. Now, let me go a little bit, Matt. Can you expand on this from a corporate standpoint? I have two questions, and Michael made one point that made me think about what we're doing in the GSMA, where we are enabling the connectivity of many devices, but sometimes I'm not managing that correctly as an industry. The wireless industry allows you to enable all these devices, but are they all really associated with Carlos correctly? Meaning, are they authenticated correctly? Am I applying dual factor authentication to all of them? Then we have now policy against COVID, in which I'm home and I'm saying I don't really want to read email from my laptop because it's too, I'm putting everything into my tablet and the tablet is mine. How can we align this, or any guidance? How can we align this, if ever?
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of things that actually augur in our favor here in this new world as we move forward. So Michael laid out a lot of great points around the privacy element of identity, which totally agree with that. And I want to pivot from the privacy element of identity to your question, Carlos, which is really much more around the security and how do I operationalize identity inside an environment. I mean, so we've been saying for a long time, to the point that Chad made earlier, that you need to get on a modern protocol. I mean, we are hamstrung just universally by some of those layers of different people that Michael talked about. People that are stuck in, hey, I'm just going to use a username and a password, and I think that's okay. Or I've got a legacy protocol that is just super easy to exploit. So there's got to be this move forward into the modern protocols. But the other one is there's this shift from, it used to be, sort of the moat mentality, that I'm going to build a network layer control and everything that's inside my network because it's on my corporate network is sort of default safe because I can watch traffic going in and out. In the world we live in today, only accelerated by COVID, everybody's everywhere. So that's just out the window. So identity, I mean, the things we're talking about here, that's the new control plane for security. Making sure that you understand at a granular level the identity, of who's actually executing into your environment is one key thing. But the other thing, I mean, a couple things. How do you operationalize identity? As you're logging it. And a couple things that I want to land. And part of it is like, for the love of all that is holy, use multi-factor authentication. I mean, period, full stop. You remember nothing else from tonight other than Littleton's like this crazy man. Definitely, at every opportunity that you can in your personal life, and certainly if you're building something out from a corporate perspective, leverage multi-factor authentication. Do it actually through an authenticator app if you can get there. If you can't get there right away, fine, at least get it turned on. That is staggeringly important. I mean, Google came out with, super sweeping statements on like, this would have stopped all of the attacks. And, we've never, it's super terrific. We weren't quite that aggressive, but it is incredibly important. And that's the world that we live in today. You actually, have to do that. And then Michael talked a lot about convenience. And in today's world, think about the technology that you have. Convenience and security are not mutually exclusive. And in fact, you can use the messaging of convenience for your users to execute step function level changes in security. So that's, I mean, the things that we're trying to do from the Microsoft perspective. When we talk a lot about zero trust and passwordless and things like Windows Hello and Windows Hello for Business, to get your end user out of the scenario where they're actually entering usernames and passwords, and you're actually using machine authentication for folks to log in. And that's, you don't have to go tell them all of the cyber lingo and here's the 27 steps and this is what's going to make you more secure. What you go tell them is like, hey, guess what? We're going to give you this new technology. Why? So you don't have to reset your password every 60 days and have it be 24 characters with, no repetition of the last 50 passwords that you used. All of that goes out the window. And you get into this mode of, because I have this technology, I'm going to make it super seamless for you to log in. You don't even know that it's way more secure. It's just easy. I look at my machine, I'm logged in. That's way more secure than actually like doing the username password bit. But then it's also simple for me. I've actually increased the level of convenience for the end user, while at the same time actually landing some significant security benefits for it. So that messaging, one, use the technology that you have. There's stuff from all over the place. But then also as you deal with your employees and your customers, it's all about, hey, here's how I'm going to make this simple for you, but there's that derivative benefit that derives.
Yeah, and just to interrupt you on that, Matt, I think you're spot on, and I think there's a lot that some companies can do to take consumer-facing B2C language on that. Go talk to an agency that really understands how to get that message across at a consumer level, because there's a lot of technology adoption reports in industry where that says employees will passively be aggressive to not adopt technology if they think you're forcing it on them. And we have to respect the fact too, none of us like change, right? And essentially what you're asking me to do is to adopt new behaviors in my life that I don't understand.
Nope.
They're scary for me. And it's like, you tell your kid, go do your homework, and they fight for 10 hours not to do it, and they realize it only would have taken 2 hours to finish it if they actually started. So same kind of idea, guide them into it. And so after a couple of days when they're using these tools, they'll realize they could have never lived without them. Right? But getting over that initial entropy hurdle, I think, is one of the hardest parts when you're rolling out these tools.
When you can figure out how to do that for kids, let me know. Oh, go ahead.
Jump in there, Carlos, because I think that Matt and Michael have really covered the subject of a human threat very well. I mean, between using password managers and multi-factor authentication, and using it as a business enabler. But we have to remember also that those IoT devices and the 100 there that are at Michael's houses are all, something that needs to be identified as well. They are also attack vectors that, we need to pay attention to. So let's say for one of the things that I did for my clients was I asked them to go speak to their employees and make sure that they were securing their Wi-Fi password, because all of those IoT devices are all connecting to the same Wi-Fi network. And if you don't have the option of putting multi-factor authentication, like I don't have the ability to put that on my Roomba, to put a long password on your Wi-Fi network. So where you can't have multi-factor, maybe you increase the number of characters in your password for whatever that device is. The second thing is, if you have the ability to set up a guest network on your home Wi-Fi network, you want to put your business computers in one section of the network, and then maybe the gaming consoles and the IoT devices in a different network, so that if anything is compromised in that section of the network, it can't get over to your business computer. So that's known as network segmentation. It's a very common concept in an enterprise, but people really don't know about it unless somebody kind of explains that to them.
Yep.
Another thing that they can do, and it's not a very friendly, user-friendly way to do it with the tools we have now, but it's called MAC address filtering. So I can say, this is Donna's Roomba, this is Donna's garage door opener, and only allow those things that I recognize and know to attach to my home Wi-Fi network, and block out everything else. So like I said, I don't think the tools are quite there for just the general, non-technical user.
Thank you. I was going to ask that, yes.
I think that's coming now. Yeah. And the other thing I think we're going to see in the next few years is really, we're going to need to have more mini SOCs, in your home. Like right now, I've got antivirus installed on 3 or 4 different computers, but I don't have a central console depending on which tool I'm using, to really look at what's going on each one of those. What's the patching level at all of the computers on my network? Or what IoT devices do I have out there? So I think in the future, we're going to start seeing more tools that are available commonly in a SOC now, in a business, be more available towards home users, just because there's so many IoT devices being added. And I think it was Michael or Matt that said, it's 10 per person in your household. So that gets to be a lot of devices very quickly, and there's really no way to watch them all. So I hopefully we'll start seeing some of those tools.
Well, and Donna, on that, just to be important too, and I think the FBI, I think it was either July or 2018 or 2017, where they actually called out a security alert on connected Barbie, because that IoT device, connected Barbie, who was there to had talk with your kid, had no security protocols on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that connected bear was having all those conversations with you. They found all of those conversations with hundreds of thousands of kids sitting on an open, unencrypted server in Romania, just there to be stolen and taken, right? And so a lot of these, like, especially the lower end IoT devices, the developers were never thinking about security or security protocols, because that's not their business. They were just there to make a fun toy.
Julia,
so
can you comment on that?
Important thing.
Have you seen, can you comment on all these devices that are coming from other countries? Because this is something that at least from my side, we are very concerned. All these devices are coming. They don't have the right procedures. They're developed sometimes in a rush. Have you seen this? Is a trend that you guys are working on?
Oh, very much so. I mean, Internet of Things is a huge concern for us for a lot of the reasons that Donna mentioned. And it's not linked to country of origin at all. And it could be anywhere. And even where they have passwords on them, a lot of times the password is password. And, homeowners don't bother to take the time to change those passwords. So even if the capability is there, the effort's not made to secure the device.
I just purchased a Netgear, and the password was password, still the same way.
Yeah, I just read a study from an academic who they actually remotely reprogrammed a connected coffee maker and used it to suck up all the credentials in a house.
Oh, wow.
So
I want two things. I mean, for the audience, if you have any questions, put it. I don't know, David, if we have any questions. I'm not watching the chat. If not, I'm going to ask one more question. David?
We do have a few, but go ahead and ask, and then we'll follow up with the questions.
I just have one question for Chad. Chad, what is a nation-state cyber attack? That's something that is being in the news. Some people are concerned, some people are not. Can you give us some light on what is that for a person that is not, eating this every day with their Fruit Loops?
Well, I'm happy that people aren't eating Fruit Loops and reading about nation-state cyber attacks.
Yeah.
That's a healthy reaction to that. But I guess from a corporate perspective and a personal perspective, the attribution doesn't matter as much. But to answer your question, nation-states are using cyber vectors to get things that you used to have to do in the real world, to steal intellectual property, to get access to trade negotiations. If anybody's even casually watched the news, there's a lot about potential election interference to change the direction that the country might go one way or the other. So cyber very much is now an active vector that nation states are using. We talked a lot about the human aspect of this throughout this conversation, and that is definitely something that the nation state actors will focus on. They will do a lot of reconnaissance. They will find out everything about an individual and your company and use that to get in a very convincing way. So it's not a bad idea on the nation state side and on the corporate side to have an insider threat program to baseline normal and to look for things that are trending not normal, if you will.
Wow, thank you. Now, David, I'm going to hand it off to you that you can, I think you have some questions from the audience. I want to be sure that we have a chance to answer them, please.
Yep, thanks, Carlos. So I think this is probably a broad enough question that that anyone on the panel can answer it. But I know we touched on COVID. I don't think this is an overlap. But curious to know if the changing world due to COVID, if you think that it's had an overall positive or negative effect on privacy and security.
I can take that. I'd like to say that it's had a positive effect because people kind of took IT and technology for granted. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And now that they're seeing they have new vulnerabilities that or change in the picture of what they're vulnerable to, they're really having to go back and understand their risks a little bit better and what the technologies are. So they're having to do those upgrades or having to look at their legacy architecture and make those upgrades to it. The other thing I can think of is they're thinking more about future planning. You know, what if there's another outbreak or something else, or you know, what lessons have they learned, and they're doing more, you know, thinking about security and privacy strategically rather than just a compliance, you know, check mark. And then finally, like I said, with a lot of my smaller customers, they're not planning to come back to their office, so they're going to be able to have more money towards a security program or towards another initiative that they're not going to have to pay a rent payment or a lease payment going forward. So I'd say all those things are positive for business.
It's good. I think there's probably some bigger customers that are also thinking about not going back to their office as I'm reading.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
Anybody else on the panel have any different thoughts?
I can say from a telecom standpoint, we have seen a lot of what I call orphan PBX, meaning an office shuts down, an office have a layoff. Sometimes, unfortunately, they let go the IT staff, and those PBXs are being used for fraudulent calls today. And I believe that's something that, you know, I know Julia have been in our forums and have seen that, and that is a drawback. The good things is that now there is a big, like Donna mentioned, there's a big push to be able to patch those, and that is happening now. I don't know anybody else has it.
Well, my reaction is the opening poll. I mean, we asked people, "Are you more concerned?" and 64% said yes. So I mean, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think what's important is the good part of that is we're now we're increasingly having the conversation. I've recently done the last couple of years did some global studies, and the people are waking up to the fact that, you know, their information has value and it's something that they need to control. And in fact, the studies are showing is that people only trust themselves to do it. They're losing trust in organizations to effectively steward their data and be in control of it. So I think that's all very good. And I think it's time for us to kind of move this dialogue forward. It's time for us to be inviting the person to be actively part of that role. And I also think that's a good thing. The last thing I want to conclude with, though, is I'm hoping that we're going to move beyond this idea, especially in the U.S. model, that harm from misuse of identity and personal information is simply about identity theft. And really, we only remunerate people if they can demonstrate with a receipt that they've lost money. What we need to realize is that the misuse of my information actually leads to a number of harms, including anxiety, loss of time, loss of money other than just it being stolen, loss of reputation, truly identity theft, and in many cases, death. I mean, we don't realize that, you know, the dis-ease can lead to disease. Hospitals who experience data breaches often have their death rates go up. You know, stalking issues are an implication. In fact, because of the reputation loss, people commit suicide. I mean, there were people with the Ashley Madison breach a few years ago. The reputation was such a big impact on them, they killed themselves. So, you know, we need to think bigger than we have been, and if we're really going to truly fix this problem.
David?
This is an interesting one, and it's sort of, you know, it's the other side of the fence, and I think what most of the panelists tend to think about. But somebody's curious to know what the changes in privacy and security, and I'm going to interpret this as meaning largely regulation, mean to marketers and advertisers, the impact that it's going to have on their ability to effectively target and reach their audiences. And I think as an extension of that, just because I come from a marketing background, you know, you could even think of the impact on costs, right? If it's more expensive for me to advertise because I can't target people as well because I don't have as much data, then the cost of my products go up, right? So things like that. Yeah. But I'm curious to know what you guys think, or if you even advise anybody on that side.
So
it's actually a big part of my consulting business. Go ahead, Donna. Yeah.
There are actually tools. It's really going to come down to consent, that you're going to give your consumers the option to opt in or opt out. and and make it granular enough so that, let's say, if you're already doing business with them and you're corresponding about one thing, that you're not creating another purpose and automatically subscribing them to that other purpose. So this kind of came out with GDPR, and California kind of modeled their privacy regulation on it, and now others that are coming along. Brazil just passed a law with like we're talking about more privacy rights. But when it comes down to consent, it's just a recognition of privacy as a human right of that data subject, that it's not just because you put together that the data is yours, that consent needs to be obtained and tracked from the person's data whose it is. So there are tools that will do that for you. But like for GDPR, you're actually having to show me where this user gave you consent, show me what the date was, and what their options were, and then make sure you're following the regulations of how long you can, use that data. And if they've opted out, that you can't ask them again and keep asking them and keep asking. There's a timeline that you have to wait before you're allowed to ask them again. But those are out there. But in terms of marketing, it's really around that direct marketing that you're going to really have to start being much more aware of consent.
But even beyond that,
there's that. And again, the nice thing is GDPR, and Donna spelled it out great, and the GDPR and CCPA help us understand that. I think what's critical for us to get is, we're all going to become direct marketers. We're all going to be leaning towards the idea of what first-party data means. How do we have that exchange? I hear the consent story a lot, and I don't think you're wrong, Donna, but at the same time, consent is a fallacy because consent is based on this idea of informed consent, and I don't think people in today's age, especially driven by machine learning and artificial intelligence, can in fact be informed. I think at some point, the idea of informed consent is going to go out the door, especially when you start thinking derived insights and derived labels, to which the marketer doesn't even know what the system's going to come up with. So they're not even informed. No one's informed when it comes down to that point. So I think that's all going to start breaking down. I think what's going to emerge to what Carlos brought up earlier is a set of new tools called personal information management solutions and self-sovereign identity solutions that allow us to take more and more granular control over our data. And it could go as far as to one day, the optimistic to me says 5 years, the pessimist says 10. And the really pessimist says we'll never have it, and we'll end up with the digital version of Soylent Green. Essentially, you as a business need to be prepared for the day when you need to actually agree to an individual's terms of access rather than them having to agree to your terms of service. They will dictate to you the terms. And that is absolutely on the horizon.
I hate to interrupt. Do we have time for one more question, David or Steve? I don't know who's.
We probably do. Although I think Michael was getting at something really interesting, and I'd love to.
You can always link in with me, though. We'll have this conversation online. Let's keep going.
Go ahead. Well, Donna had a comment.
I was just going to say, GDPR specifically requires informed consent, and it spells it out that way. So this, I didn't know. You have to show it in plain language, or the regulators are not going to use it as a defense. So it's not.
The problem though is the average American has an 8th grade reading literacy, and the average privacy policy is written for a 12th grader.
Well,
right. So the average person cannot read these documents. There's just some fundamental problem we have.
GDPR, they also have some plain language and easy to follow language requirements in there. So they were smart. They knew that too.
I've got it. But the question is about now and for the future. And right now, it's fundamentally broken. The model of consent is fundamentally broken, in my opinion.
I can't argue on that. Yep.
It is, and also is forcing companies that want to launch new services to say, well, I don't want to implement all these. I will go to social media because they can deal with it, and that breaks the model, in my opinion. Okay, I think it's 6:58. We're getting close to the end. I want to thank all of you because it's been a fascinating conversation. I wish we had time for more questions. I think we can be talking for 2 hours, And
Let's go for 10 days, dude.
10 days, okay? Before I hand over back to Steve, I want to remind everyone that the end of year prediction for the Atlanta Innovation Forum will be November 19th at 6 p.m. using the same format. Steve?
Well, thank you, everybody. Julia, Donna, Chad, Matt, Michael, great job. Thanks for joining us. Carlos, thanks for reaching into your Rolodex, and also to David and Scott, Alicia, Liz, and the rest of the team for putting this together. My big takeaway is this topic is dear to everybody's heart. I think we could have spent hours just on open Q&A, and would like to suggest to our programs committee that we address this early again in next year, and maybe some of you might be available to come back. But let me say thank you for everybody. An absolutely incredible session. We wouldn't be here, as I reminded everybody at the beginning, without our sponsors. So once again, thank you to Right Point and Stone, Carabiner, Stable Kernel, and our Women Driving Innovation sponsor, Cox. Before I just turn this over to the rest of the evening and send everybody home, I also want to remind everybody, October 29th, we have a meeting of our Atlanta Marketing Innovation Group presenting Let's Talk. We'd love to have you there. Go to Atlanta Innovation Forum's website. You can get all the information and details. I want to wish everybody a safe trip to the kitchen or wherever you're going next. The good news is no one's going on the road. We want to thank everybody, and we'll see everybody again on November 19th. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you. That was fun.
Great job.
Safe.